My daughter said dinner was off, so I stayed home. But something didn't sit right. When I finally decided to drive over anyway, I walked straight into a scene that made my hands shake. They were all sitting at the table, laughing, eating, without me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That evening felt quiet in a strange way. The house was clean, the pie I baked was cooling on the counter, and the clock seemed louder than usual. When Emily called earlier, her voice was calm but rushed. She said dinner was cancelled, like it was no big deal. I told her it was fine. I even laughed. After we hung up, I stood there holding my phone, staring at nothing. Something in her tone stayed with me. I tried to distract myself. I wrapped the pie, washed a few dishes, and sat down, but I couldn't relax. The thought kept returning, gentle at first, then heavier. I told myself I was being sensitive. Still, I grabbed my coat. I didn't plan to stay long. I just wanted to drop off the pie and say hello. The drive felt longer than usual. I practiced what I would say if she seemed annoyed. When I pulled into the driveway, the lights were on bright. Through the window, I saw movement. My heart started to beat faster. I told myself it was probably nothing. I knocked once and let myself in like I always had. The smell of food hit me first. Then I saw the table. Plates were full. Glasses were raised. Faces were relaxed and smiling. Everyone was there. Conversation stopped the second they noticed me. No one stood up. No one said my name right away. The chair at the end of the table was pushed in, empty, like it had never been meant for me. I held the pie tighter, suddenly aware of how out of place I looked. Emily's smile faded. Jason looked confused, then annoyed. Someone cleared their throat. I felt my face grow warm, but I didn't cry. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need answers anymore. I placed the pie on the counter and said I wouldn't stay. My voice sounded steady, even to me. Emily tried to speak, but the words came too late. I walked back to the door, every step heavier than the last. In the car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. My hands shook, but not from the cold. It wasn't just about dinner. It was the lie. It was the choice that had been made without me. As I drove home, the house I left behind felt smaller, and something inside me quietly changed. I stepped fully into the room, and my body stopped before my mind could catch up. For a second, I couldn't move. The table was right there, set carefully, like someone had planned every detail. Plates were laid out neatly, glasses filled with wine, candles burning low in the center. It wasn't rushed or thrown together. It was intentional. Emily sat closest to the kitchen, her hand resting near her glass. Jason was beside her, relaxed, leaning back in his chair like he belonged there. Across from them were Jason's parents, comfortable and settled in. Daniel was there too, mid-laugh, his fork paused in the air. Every person who mattered to this family was present. Every person except me. The moment they saw me, the room went quiet. Not a natural pause, but the kind that falls when something goes wrong. Forks stopped moving. Someone shifted in their seat. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing against my chest. Emily's eyes widened. She looked startled, not relieved. Jason didn't look surprised at all. His jaw tightened, and his expression hardened, like an inconvenience had just walked in. There was no guilt on his face. No shame. Just irritation. One of Jason's parents forced a small smile, unsure of what to do. Then someone said it, half laughing, half nervous, "Oh, you came." The words landed harder than any insult could have. Not welcome. Not we thought you weren't coming. Just surprised that I was there at all. I looked at the table again. I noticed the small things then. The number of plates. The way the chairs were arranged. There was no space waiting for me. No extra setting pushed to the side. No thought of making room. It was clear I wasn't expected. I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded. Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Jason, as if waiting for him to speak first. He didn't. He simply took a sip of his drink, calm and unbothered. That was when it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor planning or confusion. This was a choice they made together. I felt something settle inside me, heavy and final. I wasn't angry in that moment. I wasn't even sad the way I thought I would be. I felt small, like I had walked into a place where I no longer had a role. No one offered me a chair. No one asked me to sit. The conversation didn't restart. They were waiting to see what I would do, like my presence was a problem they hoped would solve itself. And in that silence, I understood something very clearly. This dinner wasn't just happening without me. It was meant to. Emily finally spoke, her voice uneven, like she was choosing her words too carefully. She said it all happened at the last minute, that nothing was really planned. She talked fast, as if speed could make it believable. I listened without interrupting, watching her hands twist together. Then she said they didn't think I'd want to drive so late. Her eyes never fully met mine. Jason leaned forward slightly, his tone flat and distant. He said I'd been tired lately, like that explained everything. Not once did he sound sorry. Not once did he ask how I felt. His words weren't meant to comfort me. They were meant to end the conversation. I looked around again, hoping I was wrong. Hoping there was some small sign that they had thought of me at all. But the table told the truth. Every plate was placed with care. Every chair was taken. There was no extra setting tucked away. No space that could easily be made. It was a quiet detail, but it hurt more than anything they said. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I didn't have the energy to argue. I realized that explaining myself wouldn't change what had already been decided. They had found their reasons, and those reasons had worked well enough for them. I picked up my purse and said I should go. Emily reached out, then stopped, like she wasn't sure if touching me would make things worse. No one followed me to the door. No one asked me to stay. I walked out on my own, my back straight, my steps calm. Inside the car, everything I held in came rushing out. My hand shook as I started the engine. I sat there longer than I meant to, staring through the windshield, trying to breathe normally. My chest felt tight, like something was pressing down on it. When I got home, the house felt colder than before. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat in the dark and let the quiet settle around me. Memories came without warning. Late nights helping with homework. Missed vacations. Choosing her needs over my own again and again. I wondered when things changed. When being needed turned into being ignored. I asked myself how I went from being a priority to being optional. There was no answer, only the slow realization that something precious had shifted, and I hadn't noticed until it was already gone. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling that hadn't left me overnight. I made coffee and sat at the table, staring out the window, letting my thoughts wander back over the past few years. Things that once felt small now stood out clearly. I remembered holidays that quietly changed. Plans would shift at the last minute, and I would find out after the fact. Sometimes I was told too late to adjust. Other times, I wasn't told at all. I had brushed it off, telling myself families grow and change. I didn't want to be difficult or demanding. I thought about decisions that were made about me without my voice. Where I would sit, when I would visit, how long I would stay. Everything was decided first, then explained later, if it was explained at all. I had accepted it because I believed keeping peace was more important than being heard. Jason's role became clearer the more I looked back. It wasn't loud or obvious. He never directly asked me to stay away. Instead, it was small comments, gentle pushes disguised as concern. Suggestions that I rest more. That I visit less often. That certain moments were just easier without extra people around. I hadn't seen it as pushing me out at the time. Now, it was hard to ignore. What hurt most was Emily's part in it. She didn't argue. She didn't defend me. She chose quiet agreement over uncomfortable honesty. I understood she wanted calm in her home, but that calm came at my expense. Little by little, she learned it was simpler to disappoint me than to challenge her husband. That dinner wasn't the betrayal. It was the proof. It showed me what had already been happening in slow motion. I hadn't lost my place suddenly. It had been taken away gently, piece by piece. I thought about calling Emily, about asking for explanations, about saying how deeply it hurt. But I stopped myself. I knew the answers I would get. More excuses. More soft words that changed nothing. Instead, I decided to stay quiet. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. I wanted to see things as they truly were, without emotion clouding my judgment. I would listen more. I would watch more. I would stop filling the silence for everyone else. For the first time in a long while, I chose to step back. Not to punish anyone, but to understand my own worth again. Silence, I realized, could speak louder than any argument. A few weeks passed, and life went on quietly. I kept my distance, answering calls politely and not offering more than I was asked. One afternoon, I stopped by Emily's house to drop off some old photo albums she had asked for earlier. She wasn't expecting me that day, but the door was unlocked, and I stepped inside. I could hear voices coming from the living room. Emily and Daniel were talking, their words low but clear enough as I stood in the hallway. I wasn't trying to listen, but I froze when I heard my name. Emily sounded tired, not angry. She said Jason felt uncomfortable with me being around his parents so much. She said it made things awkward, like I didn't know my place. Daniel asked why she hadn't just talked to me about it. There was a pause before she answered. She said it was easier to say dinner was cancelled than to deal with the tension. Easier to avoid an argument. Easier than telling me the truth. Her voice cracked slightly when she said it, but she didn't stop. Daniel asked if she thought that was fair. Emily didn't answer right away. Then she said she knew it wasn't, but things were already stressful, and she didn't want to make them worse at home. I stood there, holding the albums against my chest, feeling strangely calm. The words didn't shock me the way I thought they would. Instead, they settled into place, like the final piece of something I had been trying to understand. It wasn't about something I had done. I hadn't been rude or overbearing. I hadn't crossed a line. I was simply inconvenient. I was the easier person to disappoint. I quietly turned and left the house the same way I came in. No one noticed. I sat in my car afterward, staring at the steering wheel, replaying what I heard. The truth hurt, but it was clean. There were no more questions left to ask. For the first time, I saw the situation clearly. I wasn't pushed away because I mattered too much. I was pushed away because I mattered less. And that realization, as painful as it was, gave me something I hadn't had before. Clarity. I drove home knowing one thing for certain. I would stop making myself small for people who found honesty too uncomfortable. I wouldn't beg for space at a table where I was never meant to sit. After that day, I didn't announce any changes. I didn't argue or explain myself. From the outside, everything probably looked the same. But inside, something had shifted, steady and deliberate. I stopped offering to watch the kids. Before, I would adjust my schedule without thinking, happy to help whenever I was needed. Now, I waited to be asked. And when I was asked, I chose carefully. Not every request deserved an immediate yes. I also stopped hosting holidays. I didn't volunteer my home or my time. When plans were made, I listened instead of leading. I noticed how easily others filled the space I left behind. That told me more than words ever could. Emotionally, I stepped back as well. I no longer answered every call right away. I didn't rush to fix problems that weren't mine to solve. When Emily was upset, I listened kindly, but I didn't carry her stress on my shoulders anymore. I stayed present without giving myself away. With the extra quiet in my life, I turned my attention to practical matters. I reviewed my finances, something I had avoided for years because it made me uncomfortable. I met with a lawyer and went through my will carefully. Not out of anger, but out of responsibility to myself. For a long time, I had assumed my house would naturally go to Emily. It was never discussed, just understood. But sitting there, looking at the paperwork, I realized how much I had taken for granted. The house wasn't a promise. It was my security. It represented years of work, sacrifice, and choices I made on my own. I understood then that I didn't owe my future to anyone who treated my presence as optional. Planning for myself didn't mean I loved my family less. It meant I loved myself enough to protect what I had built. When I left that office, I felt lighter. Not relieved, exactly, but grounded. I wasn't making threats or drawing lines in the sand. I was simply choosing to stand on firmer ground. No one noticed these changes right away. That was the point. Quiet decisions don't need witnesses. They just need honesty. Months passed, and the distance between us became normal. Then one evening, my phone rang, and I saw Emily's name. Her voice sounded strained, like she had been holding things together for too long. She told me Jason had lost his job. The words came out quickly, one problem stacking on top of another. Bills were piling up. Childcare was becoming expensive and hard to manage. She said they were exhausted. I listened without interrupting. I could hear the worry in her voice, the fear she was trying to hide. She talked about how hard things had become and how much pressure they were under. Then she paused, as if gathering courage. She suggested that I move in for a while. Just temporarily, she said. To help with the kids. To make things easier until they got back on their feet. She spoke carefully, like she was offering a solution she expected me to accept. I stayed quiet for a moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to answer honestly. I didn't bring up the past. I didn't remind her of what had happened. There was no need. I told her I had made other plans for my life. The line went quiet. She asked what I meant. I repeated it calmly. I said I was settled and comfortable where I was. I said I wasn't able to move in. There was confusion in her voice, followed by something else. Distance. She wasn't used to hearing it from me. I had always been available, always ready to step in. This time, I wasn't. She asked if I was upset. I told her I wasn't angry. That was the truth. I just wasn't willing to rearrange my life anymore. I said I hoped things improved for them and that I believed they would figure it out. When the call ended, I sat quietly for a while. My heart felt heavy, but steady. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't blamed anyone. I had simply chosen myself. For the first time, my answer wasn't shaped by guilt or obligation. It was shaped by clarity. And I knew Emily felt the change, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. A few days later, Emily came to see me. She didn't call first. When I opened the door, I could tell she had been holding a lot inside. We sat across from each other in the living room, and she didn't waste time. She said I had changed. She said I was being cold and selfish. Her words came out sharp, fueled by frustration and hurt. She asked how I could turn away when they needed help the most. I listened without interrupting, letting her say everything she needed to say. When she finally stopped, the room felt quiet again. I took a breath and spoke calmly. I told her I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I wasn't angry, and I wasn't trying to teach a lesson. I was simply being honest for the first time in a long while. I told her about that night. About walking into the dining room and seeing everyone already seated. I described the lie I was told and how it felt to realize it wasn't a mistake. I told her about the empty chair and how clearly it showed I wasn't expected. As I spoke, Emily's face changed. Her shoulders dropped, and her eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak but couldn't. She covered her face and started to cry. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me. She said she thought avoiding conflict was the best choice. Jason, who had been standing near the doorway, crossed his arms. He said things were being taken out of context. He said it wasn't personal and that everyone was under stress that night. His voice stayed firm, like he was defending a decision that still felt right to him. I looked at both of them and told them the truth without raising my voice. I said what happened had changed how safe I felt with them. I said trust doesn't break loudly, it breaks quietly, when honesty is replaced with convenience. I told them my distance wasn't punishment. It was boundaries. I needed space where I was respected, not tolerated. I needed to know my presence wasn't optional. Emily nodded through tears. Jason said nothing more. I stood up, signaling the conversation was over. As they left, I felt tired but clear. I had finally said what needed to be said, and I didn't regret it. After that conversation, life began to settle into a new rhythm. I made choices slowly and with care. I sold my house and moved into a small condo not far from people who knew me well. Friends who invited me because they wanted me there, not because it was convenient. The place was quiet, filled with light, and easy to take care of. It felt right. I also finished updating my legal papers. Everything was fair and thoughtful, but nothing was assumed anymore. Decisions were written down clearly, with intention. It wasn't about cutting anyone out. It was about making sure my future was handled the way I believed was best. Emily noticed the changes, even though I didn't explain them. She asked questions, careful ones, like she was afraid of the answers. I told her I was doing well. I told her I was happy. That truth seemed harder for her to accept than anger would have been. Over time, I could see the realization settling in. Trust wasn't something she could expect automatically. It had to be cared for, protected. She understood that some distance doesn't close overnight, even when regret is real. Jason stayed polite, but distant. His opinions no longer reached me the way they once did. I didn't argue with him or challenge him. I simply stopped letting his feelings guide my choices. His influence faded because I no longer offered him space in my decisions. There was no dramatic ending. No raised voices or harsh words. The consequences came quietly, through changed routines and firmer lines. Everyone adjusted, whether they liked it or not. I found peace in the calm. Accountability didn't need to be loud to be meaningful. Sometimes it shows up in the way people move forward differently, carrying the weight of what they learned. For the first time in years, my life felt balanced. Not perfect, but honest. And that was enough. A few weeks after settling into my new condo, I decided to host a small dinner. Not because anyone expected it, and not because I needed approval. I wanted it for myself. I invited a few close friends, people who truly cared about me, who valued my company, and who made the effort to be present without expectation. I set the table carefully, placing each plate, glass, and napkin just as I liked. Candles flickered softly in the center, and the scent of home-cooked food filled the air. There were no empty chairs, no space left unfilled, and no tension hiding under the surface. Every person there had chosen to be part of this evening, and that choice mattered more than anything else. As we sat down, laughter began to fill the room. Stories were shared, memories remembered, and jokes told that made everyone lean back and smile. I watched my friends, feeling warmth that had been absent for too long. I realized that the peace in this room didn't come from control or obligation, it came from genuine care and respect. In the quiet moments between conversations, I reflected on everything I had been through. Betrayal doesn't always announce itself with anger or confrontation. Sometimes it slips in softly, with excuses and half-truths, whispering, "You don't matter tonight." That night, I understood that being excluded, overlooked, or taken for granted is a heavy weight, but it doesn't have to define the rest of your life. I thought about Emily and Jason, about the empty chair and the decisions I had no part in. And I realized something important: revenge doesn't have to be loud or destructive. It isn't about making others suffer or proving a point. True revenge, if you can call it that, is simpler and quieter. It's choosing to live a life where you are respected, valued, and never treated as an afterthought. The evening went on, soft music in the background, the clinking of glasses mixing with conversation. I felt free in a way I hadn't in years. I wasn't angry anymore, and I wasn't bitter. I was simply present in a space that honored me, surrounded by people who truly wanted me there. By the end of the night, I understood that my life had shifted. I had chosen my own seat at the table, not forced, not demanded, but claimed for myself. And in that small, deliberate choice, I found more satisfaction than any confrontation or argument could have given me. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. And that, I realized, was the quiet power of choosing yourself.